TV1.
So about 30 years ago, we heard these reports saying America will one day be a majority-minority country. And people said, that's so far away. That's really no big deal. Then all of a sudden, they woke up 30 years later and went, what the hell is going on? If you look at the data in this country, you have nearly 10 states where the population 15 and younger actually majority-minority. For the first time in U.S. history, 52% of all kids attending public schools are minority. And so when you look at the Asian, Hispanic, and African American population, you see it combining Asian and Hispanics. It is risen by 193%. African Americans, 37%. Again, you look at that data. When it comes to whites, -6%. And so you see explosive growth. But what does it actually mean? Well, joining us right now is a demographer and sociologist from the Brookings Institution, William Fry. He is the author of the book, Diversity Explosion, How New Racial Demographics Are Remaking America. Bill, welcome to News One Now.
Pleased to be here.
This is an important book and important information because what people don't realize, everything we do in America is really affected by how we look at race. You look at census, we look at economics, we look at schools, we look at all of these things. And so being in denial about this changing racial pattern means you're going to be clueless about what's happening even right now in this country.
Absolutely. You know, I'm a demographer. Demography is not a real exciting topic for most people. You know, I'll have to admit that.
Ain't that sexy, huh?
But, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and this is the 5th decennial census I started looking at. And I stood back and I said, wow. I mean, there is change going on in this country that even I, who've been looking at this for a long time, had not been able to recognize. And the census numbers showed it, the projections showed it, the last 2 presidential elections showed it. And if people don't understand this, if they don't understand, I'm talking about politicians, the guy in the street, local community leaders, church leaders, all of it. If they don't understand this, we as a whole country are going to be in trouble in the future.
And it's not white folks understanding this, because you look at the Congressional Black Caucus, I think it's half of them represent districts that are not majority black. Many of them, Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, her district is a majority. When you look at Hispanic population, I mean, it is changing in terms. And so even when we talk about what has been traditional black enclaves, that's even changed.
No, absolutely. And you know, the fastest growing minority groups in this country are Hispanics, Asians, and people who call themselves 2 or more races on the census. Obviously, the black population is also growing. Other racial groups are growing. But what's important, as you pointed out earlier, and it's what really struck me when I looked at the census results, is the very slow growth and soon decline of America's white population. In 10 years, there's actually going to be an absolute decline in the numbers of white people in the United States. So babies born today are going to live most of their lives in an America where the white population is declining and the minorities, especially these new minorities, are going to be growing very rapidly. It's going to be a very different situation than we've ever seen before.
And it was very interesting to me, and I'm going to go to Cleo and Avis on this. I tweeted this earlier. So Variety has a story on their site that says networks are prioritizing diversity in their new batch of pilots. All of a sudden they're looking at the ratings. They're all of a sudden, whoa, Empire. They're looking at all the rest of these shows and How to Get Away with Murder and Scandal. They're looking at, again, all these different shows, because guess what? This is happening, which means we're watching television. And so what was the norm, mainstream media, which always really meant white,
right.
All of a sudden, whites are not going to have to move over and realize, guess what? It can't just be us on television.
Exactly.
Well, my question is, when are we going? Well, one of my questions is, when are we going to stop calling the minority the majority?
Yeah.
When are we going to stop calling people, so-called people of color, majorities as opposed to minorities? That's my first question. The second one is there really a diversity explosion or a Latino explosion? Because you mentioned black people last and said, well, there's the fastest...
Pull that, as Cleo's talk, pull that graphic up, please, so we can show it. A 37% increase in African Americans, 193 when it comes to Asian and Hispanics. Cleo, go ahead.
you mentioned that among Latinos, which is the quickest growing group, then you mentioned Asians, and you said, and there's some growth among blacks. My perception traveling across the country is that there's not rapid growth among blacks. There's just maybe some growth among blacks, but the explosion is Latino.
Yeah.
And I think that we should be explicit like that so black people won't be fooled into thinking that this diversity is equally multicultural, because it's not.
Bill?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the multicultural aspect of our country differs in different parts of the country. Now, part of my book, I talk about black migration back to the South.
Right.
If you look at most southern states, aside from Florida and Texas, the biggest majority or the biggest minority group, I'll get back to that question in a minute, are African Americans, and they continue to rise. And it's not only because of homegrown blacks, but for the last 25 years there's been huge growth in migration from the North back to the South.
But a growth in migration is not a growth in numbers. That's moving from one place to another. What I'm talking about, because you use the term explosion, which implies that there's this multicultural explosion, is that it's not a black explosion.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, first of all, the graphic shows it in terms of Hispanic and Asian, but there is a 37% increase for African Americans. So you're right. The explosion is in those two groups, but for African Americans, there's still 37% is significant increase as well. Is -6%. I'm curious, Avis, how do we, again, I'm going to talk about moving forward, get folks who are literally in power positions in corporate America to realize that this ain't about us creating new opportunities. Some folks might have to lose some opportunities, and I think that's the struggle.
That is the struggle, because, you know, power concedes nothing without demand. The reality is that those in power, just like South Africa, you referenced that a minute ago. Yes, there is a white minority, but who holds economic power in South Africa? It's the white minority. And I consider that we will have a future where that might actually play out here, that will play out here. But I want to say one other thing about this. It's not that some people don't know this. Politicians know these numbers very well.
Absolutely.
That's why we have the attack on voting rights that we've experienced. Right. The idea is that if I can't win the majority, I will take away their power to vote.
Bill, final 30 seconds. How are you presenting this to folks, to corporate folks as well, to say, y'all need to understand this. This is actually happening, and you better figure it out.
Yeah, and I think corporate people, some of them do understand this, because this diversity is becoming much more rampant in the younger part of the population. If they want to recruit good young talent in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, it's not going to be whites anymore. It's going to be these young minorities. And that's another message, not just to corporate America, but to our government as a whole. We have to take care of this next generation. We have to invest in this next generation. And that will help all of us.
And that gets into education.
Absolutely.
So, as a matter of fact, coming up next, our next discussion, we're going to be talking about the issue of education, how students today graduating, what jobs should they be looking for in terms of where we're going in the country. Again, the book is Diversity Explosion, How New Racial Demographics Are Remaking America. William Fry, we appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Enjoyed it.
Up next, education right here on News 1 Now on TV 1.